us tonight. The single deadliest terror attack on U.S. soil since 9/11 has happened. They're here, and it's time to stop pussyfooting around, time to stop this politically incorrect nonsense, worrying about other people's feelings, pull out all the stops, and start fighting for the survival of this country and our way of life. You need to make a plan how you're going to protect yourself, your family, and your kids. And this is not about politics. It's about being safe. It's about surviving. The plan? Number one, get a gun. Buy one legally, learn how to shoot it, and be primed to use it. And I don't care if you get a long gun, a handgun, a revolver, a semi-automatic, get whatever gun you can handle. And don't let anyone talk you out of it. The Second Amendment to the Constitution and the United States Supreme Court confirm your right to have one. Number two, it is time to weaponize your local police department. They are the first line of defense in this Islamic terrorist war against us. And if you watch the San Bernardino attack unfold, you understand that these jihadists were not going to stop with that one attack. The local police are the ones who took down these Islamic terrorists and stopped the further massacre. Your local police, like the cops in San Bernardino, 300 of them running toward the danger, openly stating, "I'll take the first bullet." These are your defenders, and these remarkable men and women in blue are our heroes who don't think twice about taking a bullet for you. Number three, we need to close the borders from Mexico and from Canada. Pure and simple. Syed Farouk and Tashfeen Malik have set the precedent by showing the world that it can be done on American soil. And there needs to be a halt to the issuance of visas. And I don't care if it's a business visa or a vacation visa, an education visa, a fiance visa, a 90-day visa. Stop. These people do not have a right to be here, period, end of story. And number four, we must stop the refugee resettlement program immediately. And I don't want to hear that it's not who we are. I know who we are. We are a nation founded on the Judeo-Christian ethics. And I don't need anyone to tell me that I have to take in somebody because they want to change the political demographics of this nation. And need I remind anyone that we don't have the ability to vet them. And even when we do, we don't know what the hell we're doing. Example, the Tsarnaev brothers, the Boston bombers. We gave the family political asylum, and they thanked us by killing, dismembering, and blinding innocent Americans. And since our commander-in-chief won't even call them what they are, Islamic terrorists, but instead prefers to preach what Islam is and isn't, and that we shouldn't denigrate all Muslims based on the actions of a few, while he is willing to denigrate all gun owners and take away our rights based on the actions of a few. You need to recognize the danger. Talk to your neighbors. Create organizations to stay current on questionable behavior, not just in your community, but around the country. We're told to say something when we see something, but don't say anything against people who act suspiciously who happen to be Muslim, because that would be Islamophobic. Farouk and Malik's neighbors said nothing when they saw something because they were fearful of being called Islamophobes or racially profiling. And that's the plan, folks, to shut us up. When our Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, trumpets her greatest fear is that anti-Muslim rhetoric would lead to violence against Muslims the day before the FBI calls the massacre of 14 Americans a terrorist act, we've got a problem.
Details emerging this morning about the female shooter in the San Bernardino massacre that killed 14 people. Tashfeen Malik had been living in Pakistan and visiting family in Saudi Arabia, where she grew up. But she passed several background checks and entered the United States on July of 2014 on a K-1 visa, a so-called fiancé visa. That visa allowed her to travel here and get married within 90 days of arriving. So how could she have made it into the country with hardly any vetting? Here to weigh in is retired senior special agent for the INS, Michael Cutler. Mr. Cutler, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and covering this.
It turns out we knew very little about this woman before letting her in.
That's correct.
Did we try to learn more?
Well, we try, but we keep hearing about the vetting process for refugees. In most cases, many of our visa programs have no vetting process. And if you look at the K-1 program, it has the highest approval rate, or one of the highest approval rates, because how do you screen this? This isn't like marriage fraud. I did marriage fraud investigations, and we've seen where terrorists have used marriage fraud and visa fraud. The 9/11 Commission talked about that, by the way. But here you're talking about somebody going to immigration and saying, I'm about to marry this person. I've never met them. Now, they're supposed to have met them within 2 years, but if going to their country is so far away it would impose a hardship, or if their religious beliefs don't require a face-to-face meeting, you could bring someone in literally sight unseen. How do you make certain that this is a legitimate marriage?
So here's my concern. A visa holder from Saudi Arabia or Pakistan is qualitatively different from one from, say, New Zealand or South Korea. I mean, there's just a lot of crazy people in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Do we give special attention to those?
My understanding is that we do not. Now, think about something else. If you're here illegally from one of those countries that sponsor terror, why are we not looking to arrest those folks to shrink that haystack that the deadly needles are hiding in? And the vetting process falls flat on its face across the board. If you look at the Tsarnaev brothers, they got political asylum, and they immediately went home. If you're claiming I can't go home, and then you go home, maybe you lied.
And by the way, they were coming from a place, they were Chechens.
Absolutely.
Right, where there's a lot of Islamic extremism.
And if you want to talk about vetting, the law requires that if you become a citizen, they're supposed to conduct a good moral character investigation. How is it that one of the Tsarnaev brothers became a citizen just before he carried out the attack? Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, was naturalized months before he set off the car bomb in Times Square. At sentencing, the judge said, you took an oath as an American. He said, I lied. I hate America. I don't need your freedom. I have Sharia.
Fox News alert overnight. Brand new raids under the cover of darkness tied to another suspect in the San Bernardino terror attacks, a childhood friend of the shooter.
All this as feds begin investigating Saeed Farouk's online link to a known Minnesota terror recruiter named Mohammed Hassan.
Here with the breaking details from Redlands, California, is Fox News contributor and former homicide detective Rod Wheeler. Rod, what do we know at this hour?
Good morning, guys. I can tell you that over the past 12 hours, there have been a lot of police activity. Now, in Riverside, California, which is only about 15 miles away from where I'm standing now, and I'm actually at the home of the original suspects, terrorist suspects, the police conducted a raid at this home last night, and they brought out bags and boxes of information. Now, the police haven't said exactly, guys, what they recovered from that home last night, but what was really interesting is now how they're starting to connect the dots. Now, this individual that lived in Riverside, California, was a childhood friend, from what I'm being told, of Saeed Farouk, the shooter last Wednesday. Now, in addition to that, I also just learned, and this is very significant for this investigation, there's a guy by the name of Mohammed Hassan that used to live in Minnesota. Mohammed Hassan is a known ISIS recruiter to the FBI. You know what? There had been some communication between Farouk and Hassan over the past month or so. So the FBI is connecting those dots as well. The last thing that's really significant here, just so that you know, is that Hassan is believed to be the individual mastermind behind the Garland, Texas assault that we had about a year ago. So as you can clearly see, the FBI is aggressively connecting the dots on this particular case.
Randy Forbes from Virginia, as you said, also on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thank you for joining us. You heard Congressman Garamendi. We must protect ourselves. We need a declaration of war. What do you think, sir?
Well, Elizabeth, we've got some different facts. I sit on the Armed Services Committee, as you mentioned, and let me just tell you the facts that we've had just in the last few weeks. First of all, we have the former ambassador to Iraq who testified before our committee within the last couple of weeks that we had ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the terrorist threat really in Iraq defeated. There were just a few pockets of those. And what he testified was the reason that they have now grown on steroids is because this administration not only pulled out all of our military impact that we had there, but also the political impact as well. When the administration came in, Elizabeth, as you remember, they wouldn't even allow anybody in the administration to use the word or the phrase war on terrorism. And then the president comes out and he ignores this, and we now have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying that we didn't resource this fight for the period of time the president's been in office. The president then comes out and says we have these guys contained, and then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs comes out and says, no, we not only don't have them contained, we haven't had them contained since the president's come in office. And the bottom line is that this is a president that focuses on climate change or bringing terrorists from Guantanamo Bay here to the United States instead of developing the correct strategy to go after them and properly, and that they have spread and that we do not have them contained right now. And Elizabeth, one of the things when the president has talked for the last several years, it sounded noble when he was talking about not fighting with Americans at other parts of the globe, because that's what we all want. But what is not so noble is when you don't give the trade-off to the American people, and the trade-off is if we don't make that fight in other parts of the globe, we see it coming here to the United States, and that's what we're beginning to reap right now. And we're learning more and more factually in our hearings that this administration has had no strategy to effectively deal with terrorism. We hope that we're beginning to turn that around now, but it's just a shame we're waiting until we've allowed these groups to grow to the extent that they've grown before we start really developing those strategies.
Yeah, so I have a question for you. Congressman Garamendi said that we need a declaration of war, but when I heard the Marine General at that hearing, he said, quote, we are technically not at war after you pressed him about 3 or 4 times. So what is the strategy going forward?
Well, Elizabeth, the other thing that you heard at that same hearing, you heard it from both Defense Secretary Carter and also from General Dunford, was that they had the military authority that they need. This has not been a question for the last several years of this administration whether they had adequate military authority, because they will testify that they've had the military authority that they needed. What the problem has been is not a lack of military authority to do these actions. It's been that they have not had the political will to authorize and allow the Pentagon to utilize these strategies. And then, as you also heard General Dunford testify, Elizabeth, to make sure that they resource them so that they can get the job done.
We talked about resources. What resources do you need? What do you demand? As time goes on, we see ISIS spreading. We see terror attacks right here, the largest terror attack since September 11th. Time is of the essence, is it not?
There's no question it is, and one of the things that we need to do immediately is to say we're going to stop the hemorrhaging. So in addition to having additional resources, Elizabeth, we ought to make sure that we're not allowing this president to bring terrorists from Guantanamo Bay to the United States to create even more targets for our communities around the country. The second thing is we ought to make sure that we can agree that we're not going to allow additional refugees coming in like the president has proposed until we've got that vetting process right. And then the third thing that we've got to do is we've got to change around this administration's dismantling of our military and start putting the resources there so that we can continue to take this fight and disrupt these organizations around the globe instead of waiting until they use those resources here in the United States.
Okay.